Perhaps they first saw each other at the team gathering participating in cross-country running competitions in early autumn of 1995. Two high school girls from neighboring small towns competing in the 3-kilometer race. No one saw them exchange even 2 words or shake hands, as is customary among competition participants. And why should they? The girls hardly knew each other's names. Their characters and interests were so polarized. One of them, a cheerful, smiling blonde with translucent skin, captivated her classmates. The other, more graceful and petite, mesmerized with an entirely different beauty. Dark hair framed her face like a halo. Her eyes revealed a lively, inquisitive mind and determination. Catching her penetrating gaze made it impossible to look away. The girls had no reason to believe they had anything in common besides running. How could they know that their fates would be forever linked by their acquaintance with a young man, tall, sun-kissed, an aspiring cadet at a military academy? The two runners stood at the starting line, awaiting the shot from the starting pistol. It wouldn't be long before they would meet again. On the early morning of December 4th, 1995, a farmer traveling along a country road noticed the body of a teenage girl on the ground behind a barbed wire fence. Initially, it seemed to him that the poor girl had fallen victim to a car accident. Her face was almost unrecognizable. As later became known, she had been struck with something heavy, followed by 2 gunshots to the head. She was wearing shorts and a t-shirt with an inscription that quickly led the police to her school and eventually helped identify the girl, Adrienne Jones, a 16-year-old student from the small town of Mansfield, southeast of Fort Worth. The former farming settlement with a rodeo arena and charming antique shops along the main street, Mansfield was one of the last places near Dallas and Fort Worth where the serene atmosphere of a small town still lingered. In 1984, seeking a quiet and peaceful place to raise their children, Bill Jones and his wife Linda, along with their 3 kids, Adrienne and her younger brothers, moved to Mansfield. Bill was captivated by the modest neighborhood where houses stood neatly in rows, their green, lovely yards touching each other, while the voices of playing children echoed through the streets. Bill and Linda raised their children with strictness, especially Adrienne. However, she was never a rebel. She excelled academically and dedicated a lot of time to sports. After a knee injury during a football game, she joined the girls' cross-country team to get back in shape and proved herself to be such an excellent runner that she helped the team qualify for participation in regional competitions in Lubbock. The restaurant manager where she worked part-time was thrilled with the cheerful and lively employee, as were the customers, especially the boys. There was no shortage of guys interested in dating Adrienne, and it was precisely her sociable nature that made the investigation into her murder so challenging. Typically, when adults are killed, there are no more than 24 people who knew them closely. But a high school girl interacts with hundreds of other kids every day. Detectives quickly realized that Adrienne knew her killer or killers. There were no signs of struggle at the crime scene. Her hands or legs weren't tied. No one had broken into her home to abduct her. Subsequent autopsy revealed that violence wasn't the motive behind the crime. Her death seemed more like an execution, a result of someone's incredible rage, because it takes an extremely cold-blooded person to shoot a familiar girl in the face from half a meter away. Police compiled a list of individuals who might have had a grudge against Adrienne when Bill and Linda Jones reluctantly informed detectives that on the evening of their daughter's death, they allowed her to talk on the phone after the usual 10 p.m. curfew. Her boyfriend, Tracy Smith, was on a trip with his parents and managed to call her quite late. Bill allowed his daughter a few minutes to talk to Tracy. Linda overheard during the conversation that her daughter told Tracy to hold on because someone else was calling. Adrienne switched to call waiting and spoke with someone for a minute before ending the call with Tracy. When Linda asked her daughter who had called, she replied, "Oh, it's David from the cross-country team. He seemed upset about something." After talking with Tracy, Adrienne went to her room but didn't go to bed. Instead, she started ironing her school clothes. Linda recalls that her daughter seemed agitated. She instructed her to turn off the lights and go to sleep. The night passed quietly, except for the fact that shortly after midnight, Adrienne's younger brother heard the sound of a running engine near the house. When he looked out the window, he saw a pickup truck driving away from the house. The next morning, Adrienne wasn't in her room, but her parents thought she might have gone for a run. However, upon finding her sneakers, they grew concerned. Linda called her daughter's coach to inquire if there was a guy named David in the team. "Well, there's David Graham," the coach replied. Linda informed the coach that her daughter was missing, and that David might have called her in the evening. The coach was puzzled. She didn't even know that David and Adrienne were friends. When asked if he had called the girl in the evening, David expressed confusion, stating that he had no reason to do so. Investigators also spoke with David, but quickly ascertained that he had no connection to Adrienne's death, so they didn't even propose a polygraph test to him. Firstly, Adrienne's phone book didn't have David's name. Secondly, none of her friends mentioned him. Adrienne's close friends claimed that she shared her most intimate secrets with them, yet none mentioned anything about David. The prime suspect in Adrienne's case became a teenage girl from Mansfield, Tara, who lived in a trailer and had earned a bad reputation in town. A year earlier, she suspected her boyfriend of cheating on her with one of Adrienne's friends. According to police reports, the girl attacked her rival with a baseball bat and wounded her boyfriend with a gun. During the trial, Adrienne testified in favor of her friend, for which the accused vowed revenge against her. Some school students were convinced that this girl was responsible for the murder because she had already demonstrated her capacity for violent attacks with weapons. However, she had a solid alibi and passed a lie detector test. In turn, Bill and Linda suspected their daughter's boyfriend, Tracy Smith, because he didn't attempt to contact the family after Adrienne's murder. The girl's parents didn't know Tracy well. He was a tall football player attending school in the neighboring town of Venus. Apparently, he and Adrienne had met 2 months prior at a diner where she worked. Tracy also successfully passed a polygraph test. However, he provided the police with a new lead. He said that Adrienne told him that during their conversation that evening, it wasn't David who called her at home, but Brian. She mentioned that Brian seemed upset and wanted to meet her that night to talk. Investigators discovered that Brian McMillan worked nearby the restaurant where the girl worked part-time. He had a strong liking for her and would often visit to see her. However, he became so intrusive that when the girl saw him at the restaurant, she would hide behind the counter. Things took a darker turn when investigators found out that the 17-year-old boy was taking 4 types of medications to manage symptoms of depression. During police questioning, he initially claimed not to know Adrienne, then admitted knowing her, but couldn't recall if he spoke with her that night because he had been drinking heavily for the past 6 months. He mentioned feeling sad because all his friends had girlfriends and he felt like an outcast. The police built a compelling case. A young man unable to attract the attention of a beautiful girl finds a way to meet her at night, but loses control. Brian didn't deny the possibility of visiting Adrienne or taking her somewhere. He simply couldn't remember. On December 15, 1995, the police searched his house, seized his pickup truck, and arrested him, despite his father's claims that his son hadn't left the house that night. After spending Christmas and New Year in jail, the young man underwent a polygraph test, which he passed successfully. Following Brian's release, numerous rumors circulated about the case, but no new suspects emerged. During the summer of 1996, after nearly 300 interrogations, detectives were forced to acknowledge that they no longer had even a single worthwhile lead. Bill and Linda sank deeper into despair. Bill restrained himself from interrogating every teenager he encountered in town. Linda would sit in her car and drive to the place where Adrienne was found at night, hoping to encounter her killer. It seemed that the case would never be solved. Then, suddenly, on August 29, 1996, a lawyer from the military academy in Annapolis contacted the investigators inquiring about any unsolved teenage girl murder cases involving a girl named Adrienne. Naturally, the investigators responded affirmatively, asking for more details. It turned out that 2 female cadets at the academy had made a horrifying statement to senior officers related to a murder in Texas. Their roommate, Diane Zamora, confessed to them that her boyfriend would never cheat on her because they were bound by a murder. Investigators immediately flew to Annapolis, but Diane didn't confess to anything, stating that the story was merely an attempt to gain more respect among other cadets. However, the police didn't stop there. They flew to Colorado to speak with Diane's boyfriend at the Air Force Academy. The young man insisted he didn't know why she would fabricate such a blatant lie. They didn't believe him and continued questioning. David, yes, that same David Graham from Adrienne's cross-country running team at school. The David she allegedly spoke to on the phone on the night of the murder, according to Adrienne's mother. But Stacy said she spoke with Brian. So what was the truth? To find the answer, they needed to delve into the past of David and Diane. David had always intrigued his classmates. With his military-style haircut, straight posture, and excellent manners, he seemed like a person from another era. After witnessing an air show once in his life, David made up his mind to become a USAF pilot and never wavered from his dream. Many girls at school were interested in dating him, but few knew he was already taken. His girlfriend's name was Diane Zamora, attending school in the neighboring town. She was just as intelligent, athletic, and disciplined as David. Every spare moment was dedicated to studying because she dreamed of becoming an astronaut, requiring top grades. Like her boyfriend, she participated in cross-country running competitions. Anyone who saw David and Diane together knew they were destined for a bright future. Their relationship was far more serious than teenage infatuation. In September, about a month after they began dating, they informed Diane's parents that they were engaged. They planned to tie the knot on August 13, 2000, after completing their military education. The wedding was already envisioned. David in uniform, Diane in a white wedding dress, and at the ceremony's conclusion, they would pass under crossed swords held by their cadet friends. Their families were amazed by the seriousness of their relationship, which only deepened over time. David and Diane were so absorbed in each other's lives, almost obsessed. Diane even decided to attend the Air Force Academy alongside David, setting aside her own plans. However, when she missed the deadline for application, she enrolled at the U.S. Naval Academy, intending to transfer closer to her boyfriend later. Upon their acceptance into their respective academies, David and Diane became part of an elite group of American teenagers. Yet, to solidify their place in these prestigious institutions, they had to endure grueling summer training designed to rid them of civilian habits and instill military discipline. For the newcomers, these 6 weeks consisted of constant marching, running, push-ups, and strict adherence to orders. David excelled in basic training in Colorado Springs. According to Diane's letters to her family, she was also doing well in Annapolis. However, her squadron commander, Jay Guild, a likable cadet from Chicago, mentioned that Diane was physically falling behind the others because she always seemed emotionally detached. She kept reminiscing about David, missing him, but spoke about him strangely, as if she didn't trust him yet still wanted to be with him. David and Diane, once completely confident in their commitment to each other, seemed to have lost control of the situation. On one summer day, Jay asked Diane if David had ever cheated on her. She answered yes. When asked what she did about it, she said she asked David to kill another girl. Shocked, Jay listened to the story of how David killed a girl named Adrienne. Despite the strict moral principles of the academy, Jay didn't tell anyone about the conversation, for which he later paid the price in his dream of becoming an officer. He claimed he didn't want to believe her and thought the girl was just seeking attention. But at the end of August, Diane repeated her story to her 2 roommates. The girls talked, and one suddenly said that Diane and David were so close that it seemed they would even kill for each other. Diane confessed that they had killed before. Then, either out of guilt or pride, she told them the story about Adrienne. At first, the girls were skeptical about their roommate's story, but the next day, they informed a senior officer. He contacted the academy's attorney, who began calling police stations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, inquiring about any unsolved murders of teenage girls. On August 29th, they contacted the police in Mansfield, immediately after which investigators flew to Annapolis. Although David tried to deny the accusations, the police managed to find out that his friend held a terrible secret. On the day of Adrienne's murder, David and Diane came to him at night in blood-stained clothes. Then the senior officers of the Air Force Academy told the young cadet that it was his duty to tell the whole truth, and the guy surrendered. He sat in front of the word processor and typed a confession spanning 5 pages. David wrote that on one weekend in November, he went to regional tryouts in Lubbock with other members of Mansfield High School's cross-country team. The school provided them with a large van for the trip. Naturally, Adrienne Jones, a member of the girls' team, also went to the tryouts. In many ways, Adrienne was the complete opposite of Diane. Despite her impressive academic and athletic achievements, she was an outgoing girl who knew how to charm any guy. However, nobody noticed anything between David and Adrienne during the tryouts. They didn't sit together, didn't talk, and as Adrienne's friends claimed, she intentionally kept her distance because she had high moral principles and would never draw attention from another girl's boyfriend. But according to David, something did happen when they returned to Mansfield. David gave the girl a ride home, but they didn't go straight to her house. They parked behind the elementary school where they spent some time together, enjoying each other's company, a brief but fatal adventure for this story. It was an impulsive mistake, and for a month after that night, David was plagued by guilt and shame. His perfect and pure relationship with Diane was tainted by one girl who stole our purity. Finally, he confessed everything to Diane. For at least an hour, she screamed so much that he was afraid for her. She screamed that she wished he never existed, that Adrienne never existed, then screamed that he should kill her. David hardly expected anything like that, but he agreed to fulfill her demand. After Diane's ultimatum, I hesitated long and hard to commit the crime. I was stupid, but I was in love, he wrote in his confession. David admitted that he called Adrienne on the night of December 4th, 1995, and told her he wanted to meet. He picked her up in a Mazda Protégé belonging to Diane's parents. Diane hid in the back. Parking the car on a remote road, the two attacked the girl. Diane hit her with David's dumbbell, but Adrienne managed to escape through the window and ran away. Panicking, David grabbed a 9mm Marikov pistol and ran after Adrienne. When it was all over, the two left. The only thing they said to each other was a confession of mutual love. Then Diane's thirst for revenge suddenly faded, and she said they shouldn't have done it. The young killers went to David's friend, who lived in the neighboring town of Burleson, and tapped on the window. In blood-stained clothes, they climbed into his room through the window. As David's friend recounted, David begged him not to ask questions. It was obvious that both David and Diane were extremely upset. They cleaned themselves in the bathroom, then lay down on the floor and just held each other tight. Initially, David's friend did not report the incident to the police, and David and Diane returned to their normal lives. In the spring, they learned that they had been accepted into educational institutions. David was admitted to the Air Force Academy, and Diane to the Naval Academy. On the attic of David's parents' house, the police found weapons and several dumbbells confirming David's confession. After that, it was Diane's turn to make a statement. Her version of events fully coincided with David's words. In her notebook, the police found an entry, December 4th, Adrienne, 1:38 a.m., and in the parents' car, the blood of the deceased girl. She was placed in a cell. She looked like an innocent girl in a sleeveless shirt and blue jeans. She continued to do push-ups and squats and asked her mother to bring her textbook so she could study. For the abduction and murder, David and Diane faced the possibility of the highest punishment. However, Adrienne's parents believed that the loss of one young life was sufficient and requested the prosecutors to insist on a life sentence. The young individuals were tried separately, and their lawyers promised to pin the blame on the other defendant. Although initially it seemed that David and Diane would never agree to this because they promised that nothing would ever come between them, Diane broke this promise initially. However, she failed to persuade the court that David committed the crime, and she had no involvement. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole only after 40 years. The trial against David concluded in a similar manner. However, during the hearing, a witness emerged whose testimony had the impact of a bombshell. The girl had attended the regional cross-country meet with Adrienne and David. After returning to Mansfield, supposedly when David dropped Adrienne off home and allegedly cheated on Diane, it was this witness who actually drove Adrienne home. Astonishingly, apart from a few of Adrienne's closest associates, no one ever questioned David's words regarding his connection with the girl. Although this statement didn't influence the verdict, it became entirely perplexing why David confessed to Diane about infidelity that never occurred. In interviews after the trial, he affirmed that there was nothing between him and Adrienne. He simply wanted to make his girlfriend jealous. If he retracted his words, she simply wouldn't have believed him. This story shook the entire country. The shocking truth left everyone astonished at what was happening with the best and brightest youth in the country. How did David and Diane convince each other that only death could erase the stain from their pristine teenage love? How could they think that infidelity was a far worse crime than murder? Various thoughts were expressed. David's lawyer believed that his client wrote the confession to protect Diane, and some investigators agreed, believing that Diane had an influence on David, compelling him to fulfill all her desires. Others believed that David, who introduced weapons and infidelity into Diane's life, once wholly dedicated to studying, made her his accomplice in a heinous crime, binding their fates forever. There is also the police's third theory that David, wanting to prove he didn't love Adrienne, fired one shot, while Diane, consumed by rage, fired the second. However, these are just speculations, so it remains only a matter of conjecture. Would they have become criminals if they had never met?